So, one of the organs that we're going to be talking about is part of an organ system, the nervous system. We're going to talk about this one specifically because we are going to be talking about the nervous system. So, we need to talk about the different parts of the brain and what their jobs are. So, we're going to start first with the brain stem. So, you can see over here in the diagram, the brain stem is down here at the base. It's connected directly to the spinal cord. And your brainstem is in control of your involuntary activities. So you have no control over what your brainstem is doing. So what are we talking about? These are things like your heartbeat, your breathing, your digestion. So these are controlling things that are just happening all the time. So if your brainstem is damaged, this is going to be a major problem because they're in control. It's in control of all of these automatic functions. So you don't have anything to do with this section of your brain. The cerebellum is this small section back here that's colored in purple on this diagram. Your cerebellum is, again, pretty much an involuntary sort of part of your brain. It's in control of your balance, posture, and coordination. Now, it's involuntary but also voluntary because you can adjust these things like balance, or not balance, I'm sorry, posture. But it is in charge of things like your coordination. So if you have issues with things like hand-eye coordination or coordination of limbs, that is controlled by your cerebellum. So there's something as far as the connections in your cerebellum or connections of your cerebellum to your nervous system that are causing those issues. As far as balance goes, this one's in charge of balance, connecting, making the connection between what we'll talk about much later on, the balance organs in things like your ears to the nervous system to help make adjustments in your limbs and body mass, central body mass, in order to control your balance when you're, standing and so forth. Your thalamus is this central section right in here. So your thalamus, this one is kind of like the processing center for your brain. So it's going to receive information and process it, filter it out, and pass it on to the cerebrum, the rest of this section up here. So it's going to receive information from things like your eyes, your ears, your taste buds, your nerves in your fingers and so forth. So it's going to receive all that information, filter out what's not needed, and then pass on the needed information onwards to the cerebrum. The hypothalamus is a very small section on the thalamus, this little guy right here. And this one's important because for being so small, it does a lot. So this is our internal clock. So this is what gives us an idea of sense of time. This is what is kind of giving us, if you've heard of our circadian rhythm, setting our day and night. This also helps regulate your body temperature and blood pressure. So if there's damage to the hypothalamus, you're going to have problems with regulating those types of conditions, which is a problem because we need fairly steady body temperature and blood pressure in order for our other organ systems to work. It's in charge of the release of certain hormones, and that is tied to things like your emotions, hunger, and thirst. So lots of functions for the hypothalamus. Now let's look at the cerebrum. So all of those other guys that we talked about, the brainstem, the cerebellum, the hypothalamus, the thalamus, that only makes up about a third of your brain tissue. The cerebrum is the largest portion of the brain. And this is responsible for our high-level functions. So all of the other guys that we just talked about, those are more what we consider almost low-level functions. These are the kinds of things that you just need to be able to do every day, right? Breathing, moving, regulating your, daily functions of your body. On the other hand, your cerebrum is in charge of things like being able to speak and create different language patterns and so forth. This is also where you're going to be doing your problem solving, your reasoning. This is where creativity is going to be coming from, your personality. All of those are tied into the cerebrum area. This also controls your consciousness. So if damage is done to your cerebrum, this is what creates your state of conscious or unconsciousness. And any voluntary activities. So any voluntary movement are going to be tied to the cerebrum. And it also is going to be collecting and processing information from your senses. So the thalamus is going to be the filter, but this is what's going to collect and process that information. So this is what's going to tell you what something smells like, what something looks like, what something sounds like. So let's take a look at the different sections, because there are actually different sections to the cerebrum. So there are 4 lobes, and you can see that these are kind of color-coded on our diagram here. So you've got frontal lobes. So this is the front section, obviously. These are tied to our reasoning, voluntary movements, like moving our limbs and so forth, and our speech. So being able to actually make sound. So fairly important. We found if damage is done to these frontal lobes, that it will actually affect these different functions. Not to say that over time that those functions can't return after the damage is done, but it will make significant changes. So parietal lobes, so you can see here's the color coding, the blue right here, those are the parietal lobes. So farther back, and this is where you're going to process sensory information, specifically about temperature, touch, taste, and pain. So a lot of the nervous system that is tied to your sensors in things like your skin and into your muscles are going to be sent to this region of your brain, into the parietal lobe. So we'll talk about the nervous system and things like pain receptors and so forth later in other videos. Your occipital lobes, so the occipitals are in the way back, so way back on the back side. And it sounds weird, but these guys are in charge of processing visual information. I think about that. So the occipitals are on the back side, your eyeballs are on the front side. So yeah, that information has got to travel all that distance before it gets processed. So that's why it does take a little bit of time for you to process that data. And then the temporal lobes you can see are the pinkish color. So they're overlaid. So the thalamus, hypothalamus, that's actually in the center of the brain. So this is kind of a little bit of a cutaway. The temporal lobes are the ones that would be right on the sides here. And so these are the ones that are responsible for sound. So that kind of makes sense, right? Because your ears are right here. So sound is going to be processed there. And then language comprehension, because a lot of our sound is tied to language. Right, so that's the introduction to the brain. The next set of videos is going to go into the nervous system and how the nervous system works that reports to the brain, since the brain is part of that nervous system.